There we go. Okay. Ready when you are. Let me know.
All good.
All right. Welcome to In the Field, Voices from the Frontline, the podcast where we explore the heart of patient care through authentic conversation with physicians who live it every day. I'm your host, Matthew Francis, a pre-med student passionate about learning what it truly means to treat the patient and not just the disease. Today, I'm honored to be here with Dr. Douglas A. Spots, a family physician and executive leader who currently teaches in the Master of Health Administration program and the Department of Health and Policy Administration here at Penn State. He also serves as an assistant clinical professor of family and community medicine, teaching medical students and family medicine residents with the goal of shaping the future of healthcare. Dr. Spots has served in key leadership roles, including more than 5 years as vice president and chief health officer at Meritus Health, where he founded the Meritus Health Family Medicine Residency Program, led physician engagement, and advanced population health initiatives. Before that, he spent over 2 decades at Evangelical Community Hospital, now WellSpan Evangelical, in a variety of clinical and executive positions. Throughout his career, he has remained committed to caring for patients, mentoring the next generation of healthcare leaders, and applying innovative approaches like telehealth to improve access for rural and underserved communities. Dr. Spots, welcome to the show.
Matthew, it's great to join you, and it's such an honor to be a part of In the Field.
Thank you so much. It's an honor for you to be here. So, for the first set of questions, I want to get started with your early journey and your calling. So, can you share a bit about your path to medicine, what originally inspired you, and what solidified it as your calling?
Sure. Well, I grew up in rural central Pennsylvania, where my family really had roots for over 200 years. My settlers came from Europe, like many people did, in the 1700s to Philadelphia, seeking religious freedom, among other things, and were farm families. They sort of traveled up the tributaries of the river systems and landed us in Lewisburg, Pennsylvania, right pretty much not too far from Penn State in the geographic center of the state.
Mhm.
And growing up, I'm the oldest of three sons. I had just the great opportunity of, very early on, loving and meaningful relationships with my family, nuclear family. I had meaningful relationships with all four great grandmothers, let
Wow.
alone both sets of grandparents. My great grandmothers lived to be well into their late 80s and 90s. And I had also a great relationship as the oldest son with one great grandfather. So I had that multi-dimensional, multi-generational family experience, which was so important to me. And I sort of, from an early age, knew that I wanted to be um, in a field and study of people. And that led me pretty early on to think medicine. I was the first in my immediate family. I had a great uncle whom I never met, who was a surgeon in the family. But I loved science. I loved people. I loved the arts and humanities. And so early on, I thought, boy, medicine is a way I can sort of combine all of those things. And then that ultimately led to family medicine. My other choice, I was pretty certain even early on I would do primary care, was for a while pediatrics, but then I, got through my undergraduate uh, education at Juniata College and then on into the Penn State College of Medicine. And boy, it just solidified all of those passions, really from pediatrics and broadened into the fact that I liked everything. So sort of the entire experience from, well, as we say in family medicine, from cradle to grave over the entire lifespan, and just loved all of it. So it, I think, probably was not a surprise to my parents and to my family members that I chose family medicine and medicine, ultimately. So.
I remember you told me we were having a conversation previously, and you said in your teens you knew you were going to be a doctor. You were saying that you made the decision before and you already knew this was the path you were going to go. So I thought that was super, super cool, like very amazing that you even knew
Yeah,
that.
I would say to anyone that that's probably the anomaly, that's probably the outlier, because many times you go through a path where you find opportunities and pursue them, and it may lead you in a different direction, and that's perfectly okay. As a matter of fact, in primary care, and particularly family medicine, Many folks are now second career or have made that transition or are coming in as adult learners later in life. So the paths to the need sometimes, take longer to discern. But
Mhm.
I was really that person that probably from just growing up in a service kind of oriented family, uh, helping to take care of others, elders in the family, doing some volunteer work both in the hospital and in a skilled nursing facility, continue care community early on. That really solidified sort of service as another strong component to science and the arts and humanities and sort of the love of people and relationships. So I think I was, probably about the time I was in eighth, ninth grade, I was pretty sure I would pursue that path if I were able to do so.
Yeah, that's amazing. You kind of just touched on it slightly. The next question was, how did your early experiences in family medicine shape the kind of physician and leader you became?
Well, I think I can remember vividly thinking, particularly as I was contemplating primary care and the various parts of primary care, that family medicine included the biopsychosocial model, bit of the community, the family systems therapy, health systems therapy before we were really, yeah, or health systems construct before we were really calling it such. And that I felt I could make a maximal difference when I really got to know the patient more than just the disease process, sort of got to know them as an individual and their story and what they were a part of. Were they, in a family like my own, or were they in a totally different family that was not a nuclear family? What were some of the differences that they were trying to overcome? Did they live in the city versus the rural area, like, where I grew up? And I think it really resonated with me that so much of health and well-being is not just the absence of disease or managing the disease process if it occurs, but really everything else around you. So really the social determinants of health before we were calling them that. And I can just remember early on seeing that modeled in volunteerism in my undergraduate, but then definitely in medical school, going to a school that really had a strong department of family and community medicine and a lot of experiences for volunteerism as a student to see the difference you could really make in a meaningful way, reaching out to those who had lots of access and those who didn't. And so that, pretty much solidified it very early on for me.
Mhm. Yeah. One thing I had in mind when you were talking, kind of off script, you were kind of speaking about treating the patient and not the disease, and just speaking with various people, and their visits with doctors in certain clinical environments, they kind of talk about the brevity of the encounter, how doctors are kind of just focusing on the disease or just trying to just focus on the superficial, and you're kind of focusing on getting to know the person at a deep level. Do you think it's easier to do what you're doing, or do you think it's harder to do what you're doing? Why do people have these encounters with physicians where it's kind of so superficial and you don't get to know the patient and it's more of just the disease?
Great question. Lots of answers, really, but I'll summarize it like this. Just like any skill set, I think that we have to work continuously on improving our skills. We talk all the time about outcomes in medicine and continuous quality improvement, and people tend to get that into their head as a checkbox towards achieving more value-based care or more, compensation and better outcomes. But I would say that the people skills are just as important. So having a high IQ, but having a high EQ, emotional quotient, a way to connect with people is something that comes naturally to some people, particularly those I think who pursue primary care careers, but may be more difficult for others. And then, unfortunately, I think part of our education system and the length of years can really, if you don't have a lot of, I'll say, balance in your life, and those who are your supporters or grounded in something outside of medicine alone, I think it can be easy to just get focused on here's what I have to do in the moment and lose sight of the real reason that we're making this connection to help people. And
Mhm.
that's, the patient-centered care. So I don't know if I explained that well to your answer, but I think there are multiple steps. I think the educational process can easily lead us early in our training to lose sight of the most important focus, the patient. But that doesn't mean you have to lose that. I think you can intentionally practice ways to regain that and maintain your joy in medicine. And I reflected on this very recently with you, but also with my daughter, who's a second year family medicine resident and also a graduate of the College of Medicine. And we talk about it all the time. And I think she's seen me largely happy over 30 years through, lots of changes and nonlinear development of my career. And so my best advice to those people who maybe get the ratings or the feedback from their patient that they're just moving them through quickly or not connecting with them, uh, you know, focus on the patient. Hopefully, don't make the technology sort of own you. Use it as a tool, like one more tool in your proverbial black bag of tools that you can use for patients, and don't don't allow sort of the educational system to uh, erode your emotional quotient, I guess would be the best way I would summarize the answers to that question.
Yeah, I think you handled that perfectly. In terms of medical school, being in medical school for 4 years and kind of having a hyper focus on just the content and the knowledge and the exams and the boards and focusing on that for such a long period of time, like you said, you don't have if you don't have balance, it kind of becomes more of a focus on books rather than with people. So I like just having that balance with the time you spend with your family and your friends and the time you spend studying is really the key. That's kind of what I heard you speaking.
Yes, well, I was fortunate that early in my career, during the application process, I had the choice of several medical schools. I chose Penn State Hershey because they were the first school in the country to have a Department of Humanities. And coming from an undergraduate liberal arts institution, junior college, with a strong emphasis on the humanities and humanism, no matter what your profession or field, for me, it was a continuation of that, and that really helped strike that balance. And it would be a travesty if medical schools cut back their humanities, some
Mhm.
of their other soft skills training, because I think that that's what I hear our patients saying they want the most. They want the relationship, they want the genuine connection with their physician. And, the technology will help us with, getting the diagnosis and making the right choices. But I think, don't forget the humanistic connection.
Mhm. I definitely agree. Speaking of clinical practice and patient-centered care, you practiced full spectrum family medicine for decades and led both care at the patient and system level. How has your understanding of patient-centered care evolved across those different roles?
Well, I saw sort of the iteration of us talking about the patient-centered focus and the
Mhm.
patient-centered medical home. And I really bought into that as a family physician because obviously it incorporated things like social determinants of health, population health, not just the public health, but looking at disparities, looking at health equity. Before we were really using those terms to talk about that, and it really sort of growing out of the early 2000s through 2011, 2012. But now, as I reflect at this point in my career, I'm really intrigued by the sense of the movement from the patient-centered medical home or patient-centered care
Mhm.
to whole person care. So much of it was predicated on getting the patient to come to me in my bricks and mortar office. Now, and I think COVID, maybe one of the lasting gifts of COVID, which sounds sort of odd to think of a gift of COVID with all the
I
destruction
understand.
and disruption it caused in the world. But one of the gifts was, how do we meet and take care to the patient, where the
Mhm.
patient lives in the context of the patient? And I don't mean just from a convenience standpoint, and I don't mean doing virtual care only, taking the place of in-person care. But in doing telehealth, for instance, we set that up in 2 weeks. We were going to spend an entire year focused on how we can do telehealth. And then the pandemic came along and we figured it out like many people in our system in 2 weeks to take care of our patients, to take care of our community, to take care of one another, especially in those early stages before we had vaccination, before we had other methodology to keep people safe and to treat the sickest of the sick. Not wanting to squander that lesson,
Mhm.
it enabled us to say, well, how can we reach people? How can we create access at a time where we know there's physician shortages and There's, underserved communities, both in the inner city and particularly in rural populations. So how can we use these new tools, not to take the place of in-person care, but to augment it? How
Mm,
can we use artificial intelligence? I like to say augmented intelligence to help us choose the right antibiotic, always the right time, the right intervention, the right clinical pathway to make me be at the top of my clinical game and allow me to focus on you and the patient's story. How can I, meet you where you are and understand that you may be in a totally different setting than where I grew up or where I practice, but knowing that gives me insight into a better treatment plan that we can form together. And I like the family medicine concept, the primary care concept of shared decision making with the patient. I can give you all the best advice in the world and tell you have to do this, but if you're choosing between your schedule and having adequate housing or adequate food on the table and a more costly drug, most of the time you're going to provide, for your family or those other kinds of things. And so it, we may come up with a plan that's more sustainable for you if I meet you where you are. So it's a big, long way of saying patient-centered medical home, you coming to my bricks and mortar all the time, to what tools can we have to meet you where you are? And whole person care, I think, is both meeting you where you are, but also looking at everything encompassing you as an individual. And again, it's all about relationship. So that
sure.
I think has evolved in my understanding and is what really still excites me, intrigues me as I have my medical and administrative learners in class.
Speaking of whole patient care, it's kind of a term that I've kind of been just introduced to, and it makes more sense than patient-centered care because you're kind of, like you said, you're thinking about the whole, you're thinking about everything around the patient, and making that decision that impacts their life. Was there a particular patient experience or clinical challenge that continues to shape you, how you
Gosh.
teach, how you lead, or how you reflect on your work?
Well, there are many, but it's funny that you say that because as I was just answering the last question, a patient, Lois, popped into my mind where in my private practice days, she was one of those individuals who always was very proud of the fact that she was controlling her diabetes, her adult onset diabetes very well. She
Mhm.
was working hard on diet. She was working with her medicines. Her husband passed away quite suddenly, and the next visit after that, she came into the office and again dressed immaculately because she just always had that dignity of this is something special when I go to the doctor's office and I just always want everybody to know. But when I said, "How are you doing?" she burst into tears. And I asked in the context of not only through the grief process of losing her husband, but because her hemoglobin A1C had gone from 6 to 11. So I knew something was up because she was always very good about, controlling it. And it's when she admitted to me that because of losing his pension and at the time of his death, she was basically eating saltine crackers and jelly with occasional peanut butter, but paying for all of her medicines. But all the medicine in the world wouldn't help when your diet was
Not up to par.
peanut butter, jelly, and saltine crackers. And so, sort of before we were really talking about social determinants, there's a great example of a social determinant. And when you meet the patient in the context of where they are, we were able to look at the medicines and get her some assistance and reshuffle things so that she actually also could get sustainable and more healthy foods and food choices. She was a great cook. She knew how to cook, but if you're going to choose fresh vegetables and fruits, it's actually easier in our country, which is sort of a sad thing, to subside on pre-processed foods and lower nutritional value foods, and is more easy to afford them than it is to go out and do the things that you should be doing. But we were able to work with her to do that, and it just always sticks out in my mind. Also, it sticks out in my mind that my office staff, not me as the physician, immediately surrounded her with love and goodness and said, "Well, we're gonna just, we know you're not gonna accept a coupon to go to the grocery store, so we're coming to your house and we're bringing these groceries until you are able to get." the assistance that you need through the food bank and through some of the other community resources. And that just, gives an example to the question that you asked me, but it just gives an example to the power of of family medicine and knowing the context of the patient and also becoming the expert of what are the community resources in your own community where you can kind of surround people. It's one thing to just identify those needs, but then what are the wraparound services that you need? And I think again, family medicine docs and their staffs are really the folks who understand that and work with the patients to provide those services.
Yeah, that was an amazing example. It kind of tied in everything you said. Um, because even your staff going to our house and providing the groceries, that's something that's going out of your way. And often people don't like to do that. And just showing that a staff can go out their way to help this patient who can't do something for themselves is just a miracle in my eyes. It's really amazing that they would do that for sure.
I really had a phenomenal staff, and I can't take credit for that. They were phenomenal people, and again, I think you surrounding yourself with sort of first class people and really excellent people in their own right, no matter what their position, is
Mhm.
more of a leadership joy and challenge and joy than anything else. And so often the best solutions came from my staff or the front desk check-in secretary, more than the person with the highest terminal degree. But being a part of that team is quite exciting. And they were just, well, they are phenomenal people.
Mhm. Speaking of leadership policy and teaching, you served in executive leadership, health information roles, and now teach in the MHA program. What has surprised you the most about guiding future healthcare leaders? Yeah.
Well, for all of the teachers in my family, what has surprised me the most is that I'm a teacher. My beloved grandmother, who was a teacher, I know how hard she worked. Teachers work really, really hard. And while I had chances to precept and always had students and residents rotate through my office
Mhm.
through various roles, now doing the teaching full time and connecting on the clinical side in a different way is just an honor and a privilege and is hard work. So always honor your teachers. I'll just say that to anybody listening, any student of life or learner at any stage. But what has surprised me is, especially in the unique role as the first physician partner in the MHA department at Penn State, with
Mhm.
great colleagues who have all been in the industry in some way, shape, or form. I have a colleague who was a nursing leader, for instance, for 30 years, made this so attractive to me because we've all had that sort of collective experience in the healthcare industry and sometimes clinical, but a lot of times, administrative and sometimes both. But what still is surprising to me when I look at my medical learners and my administrative learners is the gulf that still needs to be bridged in terms of understanding each other's language and skill sets, uniqueness in education. And I think if we're really going to get serious in this country about tackling the big, big problems ahead of us in any time, not just these disruptive times, we need the skill sets of both. It's not an either or proposition. You're not all bad if you're an administrator. You're not all obstinate if you're a physician partner trying to think through a scenario and asking a million questions or not trusting the data in front of you. We need to come together. And I think that's true in private practice,
Mhm.
and it's true in large academic centers. We need to understand the other. And we did an exercise at Evangelical Community Hospital, now WellSpan Evangelical, that always has stuck with me of, walk a mile in someone else's shoes. So spending time as an associate vice president at the time, chief medical information officer, with environmental services, turning over rooms in the emergency room and cleaning those rooms was an incredible experience for me where I really had the opportunity to understand just how hard environmental services worked, how critical their attention to detail, cleanliness, turn over those rooms helped everything from how we could get the next person safely into the bed in the emergency room during peak times and through the hospital and to get the services and the care they needed. So, I'd like to believe that when people walked in my shoes, they understood the role of, trying to make the technology better and more clinically focused. and not
Mhm.
just about checking boxes, but making meaningful impact on quality outcomes and the care given to patients. So understanding the language, understanding the differences, and coming together to give our best work in collaboration for our patient-centric care, for our whole person care.
Mhm.
We still have a lot of work to do. It's what really excites me and drives me every day. I see lots of positive signs, not just at Penn State, but in general in the United States. But that's where the opportunity exists. Bring people together.
For sure. One thing you mentioned was the teacher aspect of being a doctor, and it's kind of funny that you said that because in my experience and kind of being around doctors and learning about the clinical environment, I originally thought a doctor was just somebody that just treated patients and just gave out medication and signed documents and forms. And kind of coming closer to the idea of who a physician actually is, they're a teacher at heart, breaking down complex topics and putting them into bite-sized pieces for their patients so they can understand, and so you can guys can be on the same page and understand. So that's kind of how I've grown to even understand what a physician embodies at their core as a teacher.
And I think it's important for all of us as learners to know, like, what do we know? And
Mm-hmm.
what don't we know as well? Where are our strengths? Where are the things that we want to still develop? And then
Mm-hmm.
look at our teams that we're building. We may have the highest terminal degree, but what is, who is the team that we're building? And
Mm-hmm.
where do we have those complementary skill sets so that we're able to help and assist one another? And I think that is something that is really important to know. So traditionally, our nursing colleagues, for instance, are so much better at teaching, giving instructions that patients really understand. And I
Mm-hmm.
think physicians need to be tuned in to that and develop that skill in their
For
own professional lives, because whether it's managing your cholesterol or taking the medicine correctly, I
sure.
think reinforcing it and having those on your team to help reinforce it, to help do that check-in is so important. So yeah, collaboration, relationship building in all ways is always wins the day.
I definitely agree. And given your work with physician engagement, the AAFP Foundation and systems transformation, what habits or mindsets should pre-meds or young physicians start building now? We kind of touched briefly on it, but if you can kind of give a all-encompassing guide, what would you say?
Don't ever lose your sense of inquisitiveness and inquiry. Don't um, embrace being a lifelong learner. Don't think, oh, I'm going to master with 10,000 hours of practice this one set of skills that I never have to refresh. Be lifelong continuous learners. Yes, board certification, maintenance of certification, all of those steps of exams you have to take prepare you well for that rigor and that discipline, but you don't get to some area where you just stop learning. And I think, I came in during my residency training at the advent of becoming what we called information masters. And it was really that sense of know what you know and what you don't know, how to master where to get it. More tools are going to help us than ever, but we can't rely on those tools alone. We can't just say AI is going to answer that question. We can't get upset with our patient who's used AI to generate a list of what they think may be wrong with them. We need to honor that and meet it, but then we have to have the right IQ and EQ to say, well, let's sift through that. Let me talk to you about that. In my experience clinically, and if I don't know something, it's perfectly okay to say, this is what I'm thinking. I want to dig into this a little bit more deeply. If we're not in an emergency situation, I want to research this a little bit more and get back to you with my best advice of how we could proceed together. What are you thinking?
Mhm.
Um, Also, in that inquiry, don't ever be afraid to say to the patient, did I miss something that you think is important for me to hear about your story? Here's my synopsis. Or take the discharge paper, whether it's sent to you in an electronic form or when you walk out of my office, and really look at that. Did I capture everything accurately? Be a partner. Help them lean into their own encounter with you. Really, the shared decision making is a two-way street, and don't be afraid of that. That's not questioning my expertise. It's not an affront to 15 plus years of education. Don't don't be afraid of that in yourself and in your patients. If you foster that openness, That's important. And then finally, I think that sometimes the best part of leadership, whether it's clinical leadership or systems leadership, any kind of leadership, is first mastering followership. Who are those individuals, Matt, that you see that you want to emulate?
Hmm.
Physicians, other students, other role models in your family, in your faith community. What is it that is attractive about their leadership? What resonates with you? And ask them that, invite them into that. The role of mentoring, being both a mentor and a mentee is something that I think is a lifelong skill. I still have mentors. I call them my kitchen cabinet, where I want to go grab a cup of coffee, right, and ask them about a complex issue. And I hope I create that with my students, uh, administrative and medical. So those would be bits of advice that I would have. And, embrace the technology, but don't turn off the humanistic skills and, really lean into inquiry, what you know and what you don't know.
Yeah. I was hearing an undertone of humility, and I kind of wanted to go back to patients coming into the doctor's office, and they kind of seem like they know more than the doctor, or they say that this is what's going on. How do you go about that with humility?
I was, most of my life I practiced in my home community. So I think, people always ask me, was that good or was that tough? Taking care of teachers, family members, lifelong friends. It added a depth and a richness that I think probably would exist many places a family doctor would practice, but more so out of the gate. I was privileged to be with my two family physicians for the last 5 years of their career before they retired, and they were tremendous diagnosticians and individuals. So I really had that continuity of practice. So it sort of fostered a sense of humility because I saw sort of that arc of their careers and the beginning of mine and really growing up and having that connection. Relationship. I think that that's what it's all about. It fosters humility when you're able to just ask them, what are you thinking?
Hmm.
And even sometimes a more important question, what are you afraid of? Because a
Hmm.
lot of times that sore throat may evoke in them that maybe that's what brought them in. But if you say, really, how are you doing? And they burst into tears, they may have just lost their job. They may be having relationship difficulties. There may be something else that drove them to coming in there. Or that sore throat, maybe a loved one just had throat cancer. And in the back of their mind is, oh my gosh, now this is me. So I think that fosters that being open, the inquiry, the genuine love and care of people and humanity at their best and at their worst, fosters a sense of humility. I think our world right now could really benefit from a lot more humility.
Indeed, for sure. Speaking of humility and perspective, as well as your professional identity, you've served on admissions and alumni boards, you taught for decades and mentored countless future physicians. What do you think defines a great physician today, not in just skill, but in presence? I know we touched on this, but what do you think?
Wow. Yeah. I mean, I think what I've just said,
Mhm.
I think to expand on that maybe a little bit more,
Yeah.
but I think compassion, service, being servant leader oriented,
Mhm.
relationship building. I think how we show up for our patients. I always found patient care and still do to this day energizing, even though I'm engaged in other ways now, maybe not as much as when I was in the solo owner of my practice. Um, I felt more energized, even on those days where I was tired from whatever else was going on, being up all night with one of our kids or, their activities or just getting back from vacation. Like it always energized me to care for others because many times I would receive care too. Maybe not obvious in the moment, but as I reflect on it, I was getting that too. And I think just how we show up for others, being present, turning away from the computer, the keyboard, so that's where I think AI is going to help us a little bit. I think be innovative. Don't be afraid of innovation. Don't be afraid of agility. Don't be afraid of embracing new technology. I often think, and I've say to my students in 1829 or so, People thought it was going to be an affront to the patient-physician relationship to have a stethoscope listen to your heart and your lungs rather than to just put my ear on your chest. Well, we know that that just magnified many times what we could really do. And the same, I think, is true of the computer and AI and some of those tools. I don't look at it as a tool in and of itself or as an either or, it's a both and. So don't be afraid to embrace technology. Don't be afraid to embrace change. And I think we get so put into an education system still, albeit one that's reformed, of this is the next step, you have to get to the next step. And then you just think, I can't change. I have to be in my lane. But I think change drives better things. And that's a difference that I would say with administrative and medical students. Um, Many times the administrative students are able to flex and change much more quickly. And I would say to my medical learners, lean into it. Don't be afraid to change. So those would be some key things. I think remember your oath. There's something different about us as a physician. We take a sacred oath, and many other professions take a pledge or some type of but oaths and covenants still matter. So I am going to take care of anybody who comes into my presence
Mhm.
regardless of their life circumstances, ability to pay, what they're facing, what they're doing. And that again fosters a certain amount of humanity and compassion and humility, I think. So I said a lot. Hopefully that made sense.
No, it definitely made sense, and it kind of spoke of the next question. You kind of spoke of AI and medicine shifting so rapidly, and you also spoke of helping others. Besides that, what do you think anchors you to the core of medicine, to its core purpose? You said helping others, and you spoke of that, but could you elaborate a little bit more on that?
Yeah, I think what anchors me maybe is that oath.
Hmm.
It is sort of, to me, calling, not just a profession that I chose. That
Hmm.
doesn't mean that you can't have a sense of calling in anything else that you do, but I think Hippocrates, the Hippocratic Oath that we take, I'm reminded of this quote, wherever the art of medicine is love, there also is the love of humanity. So the humanism, the oath, there's almost a spiritual practice when you enter into relationship with patients that is just like you're treating one of your own beloved, one of your own family members.
Hmm.
So I think that that always anchored me beyond the day-to-day stress, or if it was cold and flu season, or I just had to tell somebody that they had a terminal illness. You're allowed, you're invited in to the whole entirety of the human experience in family medicine from literally cradle to grave. And you're sharing in these intimate and special, joyous and profoundly sad life moments. And you have the ability of really, by being united by that humanistic oath and pledge, to help shepherd people through those times of both great joy and great sadness. And I think that that's a tremendous privilege and something that shouldn't be squandered.
Hmm. I definitely agree. Speaking of your Hippocratic Oath, what is one moment that affirmed your calling to medicine? A moment where you knew this is where you belonged. This is my calling has been achieved. I've achieved what I've moved for in life.
I don't know that I have one moment. I can think of several, but I probably, if I had to say, the one moment was the very first time I heard a patient say, "Thank you so much. You really made a difference in
Hmm.
whatever situation I was facing." Although I love patient stories, and I can can remember vivid story of the very first baby I delivered and the joy in the parent's face, and my awe at doing that, and then translating that into catching and helping with the delivery of both of my kids, my son and my daughter.
Hmm.
And then also I can think of a patient experience that a patient got a very sudden and terminal cancer. It was very painful. She was elderly, but had been very vigorous, and it was very clear that she was not even going to be able to make the transition out of the hospital to go home.
Hmm.
And what she had said to her family prior to that is, she said, "When I'm at the end of my life, I just want you to have one big party, and I want you to sing all the hymns that you can sing, And she was pretty much comatose with pain medication to help with a severe pain that she had. It was a blood cancer, bloodline cancer, and it was really affecting a lot of bony pain, very aggressive. And the family brought in hymnals, Sunday school hymnals from her tradition, her Christian tradition. It just happened to be that was her faith tradition. And they said, Dr. Spots, do you want to come sing with us? And I love music, and I've been a singer most of my life. And so I said, sure, I have the time. It'd be a privilege for me to share in that time with you. And just like that, Jean sat bolt right up in bed and looked at everybody and said, I love you all. This is the greatest party ever.
Mhm.
Went back to sleep, and about an hour later passed. And there are those moments, those sacred moments. I just happen to believe that where the sacred and the divine meets the temporal or the earthly, and um, there's mystery, and it's okay to embrace mystery in a society that doesn't want to embrace mystery. And it could be true, I think, of many other. I have many, many friends of many other faith traditions, and some that don't have a particular faith tradition. But I think embracing the sacred and the mystery um, is something that's always marked my career, and more than just one example, but meaningful interactions.
Yeah, that was definitely meaningful for her to get her dream at the end. There's the last thing that she wanted, and it came true. That's actually amazing. And speaking of faith, you remained active in the arts and faith communities. How has that engagement influenced the way you practice or teach medicine? Speaking of faith and Christianity, and
Yeah, well, thanks for asking that question. I mean, I certainly don't believe that my tradition or my approach is the only tradition in the spirit of what I just said about mystery. But I am part of a faith tradition within the Christian community that um, says it's okay to question. And so there were many times in my career when I had to give bad news or had sort of a really tough patient encounter where I maybe couldn't choke out the words glory to God in the highest, but I needed to hear other people singing or saying that around me. And when you asked about anchors before, that was something that intensely anchored me. I also had patients who said, Dr. Spots, would you pray for me, pray with me, especially in those moments of intense sadness? And it was never forced, and I never felt like I had to do that, but it was always a tremendous privilege to be invited into that. And again, when you have a relationship over a continuous time, you maybe don't appreciate that as much as a student or as a resident when you have sort of some sense of longitudinal care, but then you move on to the next rotation, or you don't have as much time to develop the relationship if you don't stay and practice in the community where you did your residency. But going back to my home community, having those experiences was tremendous privilege, and it never felt forced. And I think for me personally, it was always an anchor through good times and bad, through tough diagnoses or tough patient encounters, with the many joyous ones as well. There are easier careers. There are easier careers than being a hospital administrator. There are easier careers than trying to solve, patients who are really upset or maybe had something wrong happen to them. But meeting people with honesty, integrity, uh, showing up for them, being humble, apologizing, saying it's okay. I'm sorry. I thought it was this. I made a mistake. Those are just things that need to be more embraced, I think. And faith isn't maybe the only thing, but I think spiritual practice does help ground you. And being part of a faith tradition certainly helped ground me to face those moments through the various stages of my career.
Mhm. Yeah, thank you for sharing that. To end it on a high note, we talked about a doctor, the mindset, the perspective, what they need to embody. Is there anything that you would add to what you personally define what it means to be a doctor today? We talked about all these things. What is something that you would add to that to wrap it up and bring it together into what it means to be a physician in this modern day age?
That it is still as much of a privilege and an honor to interact with people in good times and bad, in
Hmm.
sickness and in health, And I think that it's a calling and a privilege, and to lean into that.
Mm.
I'm super intrigued, as I mentioned, around bringing together groups of people to learn, you know, to really tackle complex problems. And it gives me great hope to that we can still tackle some of the many, many challenges around us. What really fuels me is that we can do better, and we spend the most in this country, but have some of the lower outcomes. I'm not deterred by that. So I'm just going to say, if I had to sum it in one word, embrace hope.
Embrace hope. There always is hope. In saying that, Dr. Spots, I want to thank you so much for joining me and sharing your insights on patient-centered care, leadership, and the human side of medicine. Your perspective is such a powerful reminder of why relationships and compassion are the core of healthcare. And I know our listeners will take a lot from what you've shared and what you said today. This has been In the Field, Voices from the Frontline. I'm Matthew Francis, and thank you for listening. I'll see you next time.